Hello and good morning. My name is Dean Bonner. I am the Associate Survey Director and Research Fellow at PPIC at the Public Policy Institute of California. Welcome to our virtual program today, featuring the findings of our latest PPIC statewide survey on Californians and their economic well-being. The survey was supported with funding from the RJR and Francis F. Miller Foundation and the James Irvine Foundation. And today's event is supported with funding from the PPIC Corporate Circle and the PPIC Donor Circle. We'd like to thank them for their support. For today's program, I will present some of the key findings from the survey and then turn to questions from the audience. If you have a question, please send it along with your name and organization to the email address on the screen, ppiceventquestions@gmail.com. As a reminder, PPIC is a public charity and does not take or support positions on any ballot measure or legislation, nor does it support, endorse, or oppose any political parties or candidates for office. And now, give me a second to share my screen and we'll get started with the presentation. There we go. Before I get started, I would like to thank my co-authors on this report, Mark Baldessari, the survey director of this statewide survey, Lauren Mora, and Deja Thomas, who are survey analysts on the survey project. Prior to discussing this survey in particular, I'd like to take a moment to share a bit about the PPIC statewide survey. The mission of the survey is to provide timely, relevant, and nonpartisan data on political, social, and economic opinions, which we hope will be used to inform and improve state policymaking, raise awareness, and encourage discussion. The PPIC survey covers public perceptions, attitudes, and policy perceptions, and since 1998 has provided a voice for more than 430,000 Californians on more than 220 general issue-specific and regional surveys. Today, I'll be presenting the results of the 6th annual survey on the economic well-being of Californians. This survey is quite special in that it includes an oversample of Californians with household incomes of $400,000 per year or less, which allows us to examine the perceptions and experiences of this group at a much more granular level than otherwise possible. This survey was conducted in mid to late October using the Ipsos Knowledge Panel and includes the opinions of about 2,300 adults, 1,300 likely voters, and 1,000 lower income Californians. The margin of error for all adults is 3.1. 3.9 for the likely voters, and the margin of error is 5.4 for the lower income sample. Now let's get started looking at some survey results. Looking at the broader economic outlook to begin with, we find that nearly 7 in 10 Californians today are expecting bad economic times in the next 12 months. Economic pessimism today, while roughly similar to earlier results this year, is 12 points higher than it was in last December's economic well-being survey. Economic pessimism is widespread, with more than 6 in 10 across parties, regions, and demographic groups saying they expect bad economic times. It is notable that on a separate question, when we look at the direction of the state, Californians are much more divided, with about half saying we're heading in the right direction and half saying we're going in the wrong direction. And the agreement across party especially breaks down when we look at the direction of the state is heading. And turning to personal finances, we asked Californians to compare their situation, their financial situation today to a year ago, and we find that just about over half say that they're about the same as their finances are about the same as a year ago, while nearly 3 in 10 say they're worse off, and nearly 2 in 10 say they're better off than a year ago. Pluralities across parties, regions, and demographic groups say their finances are about the same. But it is notable that those making under 20,000 per year are equally as likely to say that their finances are worse off than they are to say they're about the same today. In a separate question, we also asked Californians to project a year ahead and imagine how their finances will be a year from now. Notably, we find the same 55% saying they expect things to be about the same, while about 1 in 4 say that they expect to be worse off a year from now, and 1 in 5 say they'll be better off. In a new question this year, we asked Californians to describe their financial situation by choosing from one of 4 statements. And today we find that about 4 in 10 say that they would describe their finances as comfortable with no major worries, while another 4 in 10 would describe them as adequate, getting by but not by much. Far fewer say they are stressed and can barely afford the basics, or that they're falling behind and cannot keep up with the bills or afford the basics. The share that say they're stressed or falling behind is highest across racial ethnic groups among African Americans, where 4 in 10 hold this view, compared to about 1 in 4 Latinos and 1 in 10 Asians and Asian Americans and whites use this description. This feeling of stressed or or falling behind actually declines with rising age, education, and income. And notably, today we find over half of those with incomes of 20,000 or less say that they're feeling stressed or falling behind. And as we have in prior well-being surveys, we asked a series of questions of Californians about their experiences with various financial situations in the last year. Given the impact of inflation over the last year, it's not surprising that 3 in 10 Californians, with even higher lower income Californians, saying that they or someone in their family had reduced meals or cut back on food to save money. Beyond the evident income divide, the share saying they have cut back on food is highest among Latinos, African Americans, women, younger Californians, and those with only a high school diploma compared to other Californians. We also find today that 1 in 3 say that they or someone in their family have looked for a new job with better pay and benefits. And this has happened most often among the lower income households. Beyond these 2 items, we asked about a number of different experiences and found that roughly 2 in 10 across this 2 in 10 among Californians have said they've experienced reduced hours or pay at work, that they put off receiving medical care, that they've been unable to pay a monthly bill, have reported difficulty paying their rent or mortgage, have worked a second job, or have received SNAP benefits over the last year. Broadly speaking, African Americans and Latinos are more likely than Asian Americans and whites to report these occurrences, and these events tend to happen, or the occurrence of these events decline with rising education and income. And beyond asking about the experiencing of financial difficulties, we ask Californians how much they worry about a number of financial issues. Today, we find about 1 in 4 say that they worry every day or almost every day about the cost of housing and about the amount of debt that they have. About 1 in 5 say they worry every day or almost every day about paying bills, while about 1 in 5 parents say they worry about the cost of childcare. Generally speaking, Latinos and African Americans are once again more likely than Asian Americans and whites to worry about these things, and worry declines with rising income. It's notable that on most of the items that we've asked year over year, the share worrying has been similar over the last 6 years. And given that we're using panel data to conduct these surveys, that means that many Californians have expressed these worries year over year now for quite a while. And turning to some questions about employed Californians and their jobs, we asked Californians how satisfied they are with their jobs and found that nearly 9 in 10 say they're at least somewhat satisfied, while just under 4 in 10 say that they are very satisfied. Overall satisfaction today is similar to earlier well-being surveys. And we find that overall satisfaction is roughly similar across parties and regions, while across demographic groups, African Americans are the least likely to be very satisfied, and overall satisfaction increases with higher age, education, and income. It's noteworthy that those who are full-time employed are much more likely than those who are part-time employed to say that they are very satisfied with their job. We also asked employed Californians about some aspects of their job. And we find that more than 8 in 10 say that they have at least a fair amount of job security. Across racial ethnic groups, African Americans are much less likely than others to hold this view, while the share saying that they have job security increases with education and income. However, while there's this high share of folks who are saying that they have job security, fewer than 6 in 10 actually say that they have opportunities for growth and advancement. Asian Americans are more likely than those in other racial ethnic groups to say that they have these opportunities. And notably, men are 12 points more likely than women to say their job offers opportunities for growth and advancement. In recent years, we've seen a lot of discussion about the economic and personal consequences of artificial intelligence. And among employed adults today in our survey, we actually find that 14% use AI at least once a day, while another 9% use it several times a week. So what impact do these workers think it will have on the number of jobs available in their industry? Half of employed Californians think it will decrease the number of jobs that are available in their industry, while 4 in 10 say it won't have an effect, and 1 in 10 say it will increase the number of jobs. Across regions, at least half in Los Angeles, San Francisco Bay Area, and/or in San Diego say it will decrease the number of jobs, compared to about 4 in 10 who hold this view in the Central Valley and the Inland Empire. African Americans and those with incomes under 40,000 or over 100,000 are the most likely to say there will be a decrease in jobs. And noteworthy, those with only a high school degree are the least likely to say it will decrease the number of jobs in their industry. And as we have in prior well-being surveys, we asked Californians a series of questions about policies that are designed to improve the economic well-beings of Californians. In total, we asked about 8 policies this year, and 7 of those 8 received support of 65% or higher among Californians. Additionally, we found that 3 of these policies received bipartisan support. Californians are most supportive of offering a public health care option similar to Medicare, followed by support for increasing funding for job training programs so that workers today have the skills they need for today's jobs. On both questions, we find bipartisan agreement with about 9 in 10 Democrats, 8 in 10 independents, and more than half of Republicans in favor. Additionally, there's widespread support for both of these policies across regions and demographic groups. There's also overwhelming support from adults and likely voters on increasing government funding so that there are more child care programs available for lower income working parents, and for expanding the eligibility and payments of the earned income tax credit for lower income working families and individuals. On both policies, more than 8 in 10 Democrats, 7 in 10 or more independents, and more than 4 in 10 Republicans are in favor. And support for both of these policies is also widespread, with 2 in 3 or more across regions and demographic groups in favor. Beyond these two questions or these four questions, we found overwhelming support among adults and likely voters for housing policies that aim to increase the supply of housing so that more lower income and middle income Californians could afford to purchase our home, or policies that would keep rents more affordable. Additionally, we found strong majority support of two and three or more for increasing the minimum wage. Now, you may be asking, what's the one policy that didn't receive majority support? That one issue that failed to garner majority support is a proposed universal basic income of $1,000 a month or more, whether or not for all adult citizens, whether or not they work or not. This had the support of 46% of adults and 40% of likely voters. Now, this survey covered a lot of ground on a lot of different topics. I really would encourage you to go online and actually find the crosstabs that we have online, as well as the time trends that are among adults, among the lower income sample, and among likely voters that we've done for over these last few years. And at this point, I would like to remind everyone that you can submit questions to ppiceventquestions@gmail.com. And at this point, we'll go ahead and move forward with answering some of those questions I believe we already have in the queue. And so from Sacramento, we have a question. The survey shows that most Californians are satisfied with their own finances, but they expect bad economic times in the next year. What do you make of this disparity? Well, this is a really great question, something that I've kind of pondered since we got the data. And so while we do find that most Californians are satisfied with their personal finances, only 20% say that they're very satisfied. And so this compared to the share, which I think is about 1 in 4, who say they're not satisfied. So while there is some overall satisfaction, I think it's important to note that satisfaction, the share saying they're very satisfied, isn't overwhelming. Additionally, as I mentioned earlier, about half feel that their financial situation is about the same as a year ago and expect it to be about the same a year from now. And so I think that kind of tells you a lot about how people are feeling. And lastly, I think this question really gets at about economic pessimism, really gets at kind of the broader question. And that's being impacted, I think, by some uncertainty around the national economy and by some of the potential impacts maybe of tariffs and some other policies that are coming down the pipeline. So we have another question here. Are there any sizable differences in Californians' views about AI's economic impact across regions and income level? I mentioned earlier the finding about Los Angeles, San Francisco Bay Area, and Orange, San Diego being more likely to say that they're going to have that AI will have an impact or decrease the number of jobs that they have. But it is also important to note that we did ask a question about concern about losing their job or having their hours cut. And it's notable that there were some economic differences, I mean, some regional differences there. If I may kind of look at my crosstabs and be a little bit kind of sidetracked here, is to say that we did find that 4 in 10 in Los Angeles said that they were very or somewhat concerned about their job being impacted, compared to about 1 in 3 in the Bay Area and 1 in 3 in the Inland Empire. And so beyond kind of the impact it could have on jobs in the future, there is kind of these regional differences when it comes to concern about losing their job or having their hours cut. And so I would encourage you to kind of go online and look at the crosstabs for this. It's really interesting because there are kind of these income differences as well, where the lowest of the low income, about 2 in 3, are concerned about their job being impacted, compared to about 3 in 10 among the highest income earners in the state. And so, turning to another question, you mentioned that the survey looks at Californians' views um, on the availability of jobs and wanting to move out of the state. Can you summarize these feelings, and have there been noticeable changes since the pandemic? First of all, the overall finding on this is that about 1 in 4 say that they've seriously considered moving out of their part of California because of the availability of well-paying jobs. And most of these folks who say they have seriously considered, about 3/4, say that they would move outside the state. So I think it's something like 21% of the overall sample say they've seriously considered moving outside the state. And just about, I think, 4 or 5% have said they consider moving somewhere else in the state. It is noteworthy that since the pandemic, where we saw like nearly 1 in 3 saying they were seriously considering moving outside the state. Today, that number is 25%. So there has been a little bit of a decrease, but pretty consistently, the share of Californians has of those who've said that they're considering it. Most of them have always said that they would consider moving outside the state rather than to another part of the state. And so this is a really great question that I think pairs well with this survey. So we have another question from Anahita Chaudhary at Dartmouth College. Do you think administering the survey during different times of the year could have an influence on results? The survey this year was conducted earlier than it was last year. I wonder if being closer to the end of the year or the holiday season can impact people's attitudes and responses. This is a really great question. I think, we often talk about the order that questions are asked, but when questions are asked, I think is another great point, because generally speaking, the closer you get to the end of the year, a lot of people do start feeling some kind of financial tightness. However, I will say that, if you look at the time trends, a lot of these questions have been really similar year over year, whether it be the share looking to move out, where there has been some changes, whether it be the problem seriousness of well-paying jobs, whether it be kind of the finances looking ahead or back, or the overall financial situation. So perhaps given, we were kind of, towards, getting close to November, maybe that had already started to set in, especially as, we're already seeing, Black Friday sales. And so that's already starting to, this idea of shopping and whatnot, have already started to be on people's minds, it would seem. But that's a great question. And it is a reason why we've always had for example, our environmental survey, we always ask about the strain of gas prices. During the summer, gas prices are higher. If we ask that question right now, the results could be slightly different, given that gas prices perhaps seasonally aren't as high as during the summer. So great question. Another question, have there been any recent shifts in Californian support for different policies that the survey looks at? For example, job training, public health care, child care, or have those opinions been mostly stable? This is really interesting because I've kind of been fascinated with this. It's kind of a nerdy thing to say, but the fact that and I had to look at it this year because it's been something I've been enthralled with over these last few years. The stability in these policy questions. These policy questions weren't necessarily always the highest during the pandemic or since then. And in fact, when I looked from the highest to the lowest support for all of these policies, it falls within a range of 5 points. And so, for example, if something's 85% today, the lowest it's ever been was 80%, which to me is just really, really interesting because you really don't see that stability time after time often. And so, I will say that there have been some fluctuation across subgroups I've noticed over the findings. And so, but overall, the actual overall findings have been extremely, really, really stable over this time. And that's one, just to plug again, I would really encourage you to go look at the time trends to see how these questions have changed over time. Um, and we have another question, one of our favorites. Someone always seems to ask this, and it's something I'm normally prepared for because of it's a question that journalists like to ask, and that is, was there anything that surprised you in this survey? Um, I think there are a couple, so I'll take the liberty to discuss two. The first being is a question that we asked for the first time this year among people who are remote workers or who are fully remote or hybrid remote workers. And it was a question about how likely are you to stay at your current job if you were no longer able to work from home. And we found that 1 in 3 said that they were unlikely to stay at their job if they could no longer work from home. As you might guess, I'm actually working from my home today. I can say that I would be one of the ones who would be likely to stay at their job. But the fact that about 1 in 3 said that they were unlikely to stay, as well as a sizable portion that said that that it would have no effect one way or the other. So that's one thing that was very surprising to me on a new question. And then another thing that was surprising on a very old question that we brought back for the first time since the year 2000, I believe, is that we find that 80% of Californians today say that elected officials don't care what people like them think. This was 55% in 2000. So that is a sizable increase in the share of Californians who just don't think that elected officials care what they think. And this kind of dovetails well with kind of some of the political trust questions that we asked last month, where there's and where we've blogged on these issues, where Californians are extremely distrustful of the state government, of the federal government. They think a lot of money is wasted. They think government is run for a few big interests. So I guess kind of looking at it, it shouldn't be that surprising that 80% hold this view. But it was really surprising because I recall when we kind of were looking at questions for this survey, I do recall that, it was 55% in California. And I was kind of like, oh, let's see where it's at today. But the fact that it's increased 25 points is quite interesting. And so at this time, I appreciate all the questions that were asked. And we've now reached the end of our program, unfortunately, given that I love this survey stuff, we could be here for a lot longer. But I do want to thank all of you for joining me today. I would also like to thank our funders, the RJR and Francis F. Miller Foundation, the James Irvine Foundation, the PPIC Corporate and Donor Circles. We would appreciate you taking a moment to give us feedback on this event. If you pre-registered for the event, you'll receive an email later today with a link to a short survey, but you can also scan the QR code that's on your screen right now. Finally, a recording of today's event will be available on the PPIC website and on our YouTube channel soon, so you can watch it again, or if you found something interesting and you want to share it within your network. At this point, I would like to thank you for joining me this morning for this event, and I hope that you all have a very great afternoon.